Hello everybody and welcome back to the channel. Today we will be listening to the 9th part of What If Deku Became a Vigilante. If you enjoy, please consider liking, commenting, and subscribing down below, and don't forget to hit that bell icon so you get notified when videos go live. Now, without further ado, let's get into the video. Chapter 29, Internships. We're picking internships now, Eureka said, picking at her lunch. Aitsa wasn't there, apparently using lunch to turn in his decision, and Eri had decided to eat her lunch with Kurana-sensei. I bet you got a lot of offers, Izuku said, shoving food into his face. Thankfully, the bandages were gone now, courtesy of Kaken dragging him to Recovery Girl's office this morning. Have you picked already? I did. She grinned suddenly, looking a lot more maniacal. I'm interning with Mirako. Everyone else at the table collectively shivered. Eureka did not need to get scarier. Aitsa's interning with Manuel, she continued. Manuel? Izuku asked. I thought he would intern with his brother. Apparently he's being kept at the hospital to make sure the miracle healing didn't fuck him up further, and by the time he returns to the field, Aitsa's internship will be over. But why Manuel? Shinsu asked. Not that he's a bad hero, he's pretty good, but they don't seem similar at all. Kaken scoffed from next to them. Do you really think it's a coincidence that he picked the hero stationed in Hosu, right after his brother was attacked there, and where the hero killer is probably going to be lurking around? Use your brain, mindfuck. They all sobered up at the mention of the hero killer. In order to direct the conversation to a better, less depressing subject, Izuku turned to Shinsu, despite already knowing the answer. Who are you interning with? He raised an eyebrow. Eraserhead, obviously. Obviously. Shouto spoke up. Are you sure you aren't Dash? For the last time, I am not Aizawa-sensei's love child. This time Eureka spoke up, probably to interrupt the argument and prevent it from going any further. Todoroki, have you picked who you're interning with yet? He shook his head. I haven't yet. Well, what do you want out of this internship? Izuku asked, mind immediately racing. I want more control with the fire side of my quirk. Izuku scooted over, placing his head on Shouto's shoulder as he looked over his shoulder at the list of names. I'd recommend Ed Shot. He has precise mastery over his quirk, and I'm sure he'll be able to teach you better than most of these heroes. He felt Shouto tense against him, and when he scooted back, he saw that part of Shouto's hair was on fire. Oh, sorry. I'm sorry, I live with Eri, sometimes I forget that personal space is a thing. His face was bright red as he muttered, thank you, Midoriya. Izuku could feel Kaken glaring at him, so he turned towards his best friend with a smile. Who are you interning with, Kaken? Kaken puffed up. I'll be interning with Endeavor. Why? Everyone else at the table practically shouted. Oh, I think I get it. Izuku said. While Endeavor himself is a dumpster fire, the other heroes at his agency are much better and deserve way more credit than they're currently receiving. Plus, interning with the number 2 hero can build valuable connections, and it's a valuable PR lesson, even if it's a lesson on what not to do. Kaken flicked him in the forehead. Nerd, you're overthinking it? Then why are you interning with him? He grinned. To make his life miserable. Kaken no. Wild squad of dumbass, 6:20 p.m. Daddy issues, Dabby, Dumbass 1, Kitsune, Dumbass 2, Himiko, and Hacker Voice, Degree, La Brava, are online. Daddy issues, we need to talk. Hacker Voice, Degree who died? Dumbass 1, what? Dumbass 2, who do we have to kill? Daddy issues, about the sports festival, Comware tits. Hacker Voice, Degree G's. Dumbass 2, so no murder. Daddy issues, no. Dumbass 1, you couldn't have said that first, asshole. Dumbass 1, I have anxiety. Hacker Voice, Degree bitch, since when? Dumbass 2, yeah, I watch you pull shit all the goddamn time. Dumbass 1, listen. Dumbass 1, I'm not afraid of death. Dumbass 1, but if you ask me to correct my order I will cry. Dumbass 2, valid. Hacker Voice, Degree valid. Daddy issues, valid. So, you know my name now. The room was really tense. Kitsune was sitting in his usual chair, curled up instead of sprawled out like usual. Gentle was sitting at the bar, La Brava next to him, both of them having a cup of chamomile tea. Dabby was pacing, which was not helping, and Himiko sat crisscross applesauce on the floor, slurping blood out of a blood bag. Identities were important in this business. Giving your name out to the wrong person can land you in prison or dead. An identity being revealed can collapse alliances that have lasted for years. Betrayals were unfortunately common. No one could blame him for being wary. "We haven't looked up anything else about you," Gentle said, sipping his tea. She could see that Kitsune relaxed, ever so slightly. "We all know how important privacy is. And knowing your name hasn't changed anything," La Brava added on. "You're still Kitsune, our friend. Our ride or die friend." Himiko cheered. "Ride or die squad. Besides, it's a nice addition to Dabby's conspiracy theory board," La Brava teased. "Hey, we agreed not to talk about that." Kitsune chuckled, and that's when Himiko decided to speak up. "Besides, now that we know your name, we should tell you ours." His eyes widened at that. "Wait, guys dash." She stood up with a flourish. "Toga Himiko. It's a pleasure to meet you all. Tobita Danjiro," Gentle bowed. "Also known as the dashingly dapper Vigilante, Gentle Criminal. Abominami, also known as La Brava. I'm not getting up." Kitsune chuckled, finally uncurling himself. "Midoriya Izuku, also known as Kitsune, Watcher of the Night." La Brava frowned. "That's such a cool epithet, I'm still jealous." Himiko turned to Dabby, who was still pacing. "Come on, Dabster, you've gotta say it too. Ride or die squad. 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 Squad." Foxy and La Brava joined in on the chant, and eventually Dabby groaned, flopping down onto one of the beanbag chairs. "Todoroki to ya." Wait, La Brava said. "Like the missing Todoroki, Todoroki to ya." Dabby nodded. "Well, I was not expecting that," Gentle said, sipping his tea. "I never expected the conspiracy theories to be genetic." Everyone stared at Foxy. "Shouto is convinced I'm All Might's secret son," he said, as if that explained anything. Dabby pulled out his phone. "Well. No, not you too." Chapter 30, The Hosu Incident. Her heart pounded as her back hit the mat again. Okako barely caught the water bottle that Mirako threw at her, gulping it down greedily as she sat up. The past few days had been hectic, with Okako going through non-stop combat drills and rooftop patrols. She could feel herself improving, getting faster and stronger as she learned every new technique. She even got some recommendations on how to improve her costume to better protect her joints and make use of her strengths. Mirako didn't have an agency, so they were at Gunhead's agency, and she's been getting useful tips from the other hero too. Now she can last a whole minute against Mirako. Gunhead's agency was in the suburbs of Hosu, a good 20 minutes from downtown. They never went into downtown Hosu, mainly sticking in the area that Gunhead's agency operates in, since it's relatively quiet, and it's harder to parkour. Mirako's justification is that if Okako was good at parkour in the suburbs, she could easily maneuver in the city. "Mirako." One of Gunhead's sidekicks came in, holding her ringing phone up. The heroine caught it easily, giving the sidekick a short nod and taking a swig of water while she answered the phone. Whatever she heard on the other side of the phone caused her to spit out her water. 3A rank villains. Are you shitting me? She listened, one foot thumping on the floor in a manner that Okako recognized as her letting loose some energy. "I have an intern, I can't just bring her in. I'll figure it out." "Right, bye." Mirako hung up, scrolling through her phone, becoming more and more tense. "Sensei, what's going on?" Okako asked, standing up fully. "Listen, kid, you're going to stay here," Mirako said. "There's an attack in downtown Hosu, and I can't bring you into it. I'm getting the debrief through the HN and then I'm leaving. You need to stay here and stay safe." Okako peeked over the heroine's shoulder, and a shiver went down her spine. Those are Numu." Her ear twitched as she turned to Okako. "You know what they are?" "Yeah," she nodded. "They're the same as the one that attacked you. She could see her mentor arguing with herself, and eventually losing. "Get your costume on and meet me in front of the agency. You are not allowed to engage them, you are only helping civilians, and on our way there, You are going to tell me everything you know about these Numu. Got it? Yes ma'am. Okako bowed, then started running to her room to get changed. She remembered the bloodied body of her teacher, and the bandages he had to wear for weeks afterwards. She remembered Kitsune, bloody and beaten, standing in between her and Shigaraki. She remembered the blood and gore that covered the plaza of the USJ. This time, no one was gonna get hurt on her watch. Your quirk is going to follow your emotions, and that's natural. You must be able to keep a clear head, even in battle, or you will lose control. Use your emotions, don't let them use you. Shoto nodded, but kept his eyes on his hands. They were sitting in the center of the dojo, and Shoto was breathing deeply, in and out, while both the flame and ice crystals in his hands grew and shrunk with his breathing. It was peaceful, almost meditative, sitting for a few minutes and breathing with his quirk. They did this before every quirk control and combat exercise, and a few minutes before curfew. His internship with Edshot has helped a lot. He's taught him exercises to get more precise control over both his fire. Unlike his father, Edshot prioritized precision over power, so he learned a lot of control over his ice too. Plus the martial arts training has helped to put the exercises into a more practical perspective. He doesn't think he'll go full ninja like his mentor, but he might ask Aizawa-sensei if he could learn some more quirkless combat. It also put some perspective on his father's training. Edshot never hurt him, the most he got hurt were a few burns from when Shoto lost control, and those were quickly wrapped up. It was strange, but not in a bad way. It seems ever since he got into UA he's been doing a lot of thinking. Then there was a deafening crash, and the piece was literally shattered. His mentor was immediately on high alert, and so was Shoto. We're going to investigate, Edshot said. You are not allowed to engage, just to rescue and evacuate civilians. Do not use your fire, your control isn't ready yet. You do have permission to use your ice. Shoto nodded, getting up on his feet and brushing off the shards of ice. This wasn't exercises in Edshot's dojo, this was a real situation with real lives. You must be able to keep a clear head. He took one last deep breath in, and out, and followed his mentor. Katsuki's internship was going surprisingly well, all things considered. While Dumpster Fire has been as much help as a sack of shit, he's gotten genuinely decent advice from his sidekicks. When he isn't corralled into a patrol or fucking with the Dumpster Fire, he's usually sparring and hanging with the sidekicks, soaking up valuable wisdom from the actually useful members of the agency. And they were like him, brash and unapologetically themselves without being pieces of shit. As for fucking with the Dumpster Fire, he's been consistently pulling pranks. He's hidden garbage-themed rubber ducks around the agency, filled his desk with packing chips, drew little mustaches on all the photos of the Dumpster Fire, and has moved all the furniture in his office an inch to the left. The best part is that when the Dumpster Fire tries to yell at him, he just takes out his hearing aids and pretends they were never in. Plus, it's not like the Dumpster Fire could really do anything to him. If he got seriously hurt under the hero's care, UA will take his ass out with the rest of the trash. Hell, he's been in close enough proximity with the rat that he's pretty sure the principal would just murder Endeavor. Which means Katsuki could enjoy his wrath, and the hero can't do anything about it. Anyways, like previously mentioned, Katsuki's internship was going surprisingly well. Which meant that of course, it all had to go to shit. How did it all go to shit? 3 fucking numas. The Dumpster Fire gave him permission to use his quirk to fight, but Katsuki's not a fucking idiot. He's not gonna risk getting burned because he tried to get in the way of the other hero. Instead, he's being productive and using his explosions to destroy rubble and free trap civilians. Oi, watch it dipshit. He turned to see a heavily scarred man dodge Dumpster Fire's flames, holding a little girl in his arms. And what is a lowly broker doing here? Dumpster Fire huffed. Doing your job better than you, apparently, the man shot back, setting the little girl down and giving her a little push. She ran towards Katsuki, who directed her over to Burnin. Criminal scum like you should be dash. Will you shut the fuck up and do your job? Scarred man shot back. Go kill the Numu so that the actually useful people can work. While they were arguing, the Numu had gotten back up. And while he didn't like the Dumpster Fire, Katsuki had to admit that he was their best chance at defeating these things, so he flew over and unleashed a gauntlet-powered blast into its face. He then quickly got out of the way as the Dumpster Fire started fighting the Numu again. Katsuki spotted the other guy trying, and failing, to free a man pinned down by a slab of concrete. He ran over, lifting it up while Burnt Chicken dragged the man out. Only when the civilian was freed did Katsuki use his quirk on the concrete. Vernon and the rest of the agency has an evacuation station at the deli, Katsuki said quickly. Burnt Chicken nodded, slinging the man over his shoulder. Thanks kid. This should be everyone in this area. When I passed the other heroes, it looked like Manuel needed help. Katsuki looked over at the dumpster fire, saw that he was handling it, and turned back to Burnt Chicken. Where? By the Walmart on 5th. He nodded, turning and running off. He couldn't afford to wait around. Okako released her quirk, letting the heavy slab drop to the ground. She and one of Ingenium's sidekicks, Big Shot, were working together to evacuate civilians, while Mirako and a few other pros were taking on one of the Namu. Big Shot draped the civilian over his shoulder and ran off, so Okako looked around to see if she could spot anyone else. Watch out. All she had time to do was look behind her, eyes widening as a large hunk of rock was hurtling towards her. Crash. A blur had knocked the rock out of the way, sending it crashing to the ground next to her. The blur revealed itself to be a girl, in a high school uniform with a cream cardigan over her shoulders. She was wearing a strange apparatus over her shoulders, and a scarf, covered the lower half of her face. The most striking thing about her was blonde hair pulled into two high buns and gold eyes with cat-like pupils. You okay? She asked. Okako nodded. Thank you. Who are you? Her savior grinned, revealing fangs. Call me Himi-chan. Then call me Uravite, she said with a smile. Why are you here? Same as you, silly. I'm here to help. She hesitated. Then can you help me free civilians? Himi-chan practically beamed. Of course, Yura can. Katsuki helped a civilian up on his feet, making sure he was good to walk before handing them off to another sidekick. He then made a beeline to Manuel. I was sent by Endeavor to help. He gave me permission to use my quirk. The hero looked back at him from where he was restraining the Namu. Have you seen Aitsa? Katsuki shook his head as the hero swore. All right, evacuate civilians so the rest of us can focus. He nodded as he dashed off, running to where he spotted a trapped woman. No sooner than when he got the woman free, did Edshot fly in, with Icy Hot following him. Edshot immediately engaged the Namu, and Icy Hot skated over to him. Where's Aitsa? I don't know, but Four Eyes probably went to fight Stain. Icy Hot raised his hand to his ear, as if he was listening to something, then said, I'm going to go look for him. Knowing it was probably futile to argue with him, and currently busy, Katsuki just told him, don't fucking die. Icy Hot nodded as he skated away. Katsuki rolled his eyes, slinging the lady's arm over his shoulder and helping her to the evac point that Manuel's agency had set up. He was busy with his own shit, he didn't have time to worry about the extras. Shouto skated over to Bakugo as his mentor engaged the Namu. He was lifting up a piece of rubble, as a woman scooted her way out from underneath it. He scanned the rest of the area, frowning as he realized someone was missing. Where's Aitsa? Bakugo grimaced, as if he was holding back an eye roll. I don't know, but Four Eyes probably went to fight Stain. Shouto opened his comm link, knowing Edshot was listening. Go find the kid. Do not engage the hero killer, escape if you run into him. He closed the comm link, after tapping it to make sure Edshot knew he heard him. I'm going to go look for him. Bakugo finally rolled his eyes. Don't fucking die. Shouto nodded, turning around and skating off to the alleys. Based on the constant ramblings of his father, Stain was an ambush villain, and almost all of his attacks had been in alleys. His phone vibrated in his pocket, and he opened it to see a message from Aitsa. A location ping. He kept it out as he followed the little marker, praying that he wasn't too late. Chapter 31, Stain, Stendhal, Sensei. Tinya was certain he saw his life flashing before his eyes. He was laying face down on the ground, shoulder bleeding out from where Stain had stabbed him. He was immobilized, paralyzed due to the villain's quirk. He remembered his brother, lying on the hospital bed. He remembered Manuel's advice against hunting down the hero killer. He remembered the anger that coursed through him as he saw a hint of red in an alleyway. He remembered when he first met his friends, and his determination to be a hero that followed in his family's footsteps. And he realized that he wasn't going to be a hero, worthy of the Aitsa name. He was going to die in an alleyway, alone, a failure. He closed his eyes, preparing himself to die. Tenya, you can't go after Stain. The family name is not more important than your life. I'll be back on the field soon anyways. Just because he still hurt you. If some mysterious person didn't heal you, you would be paralyzed. Tenya. Promise me you won't go after the hero killer. I promise, Tensei. He heard the clash of steel on steel above him, and opened his eyes to see a glowing Kitsune mask in the darkness. It's been a while, Sensei. Kitsune stood at the end of the alley, holding a knife in one hand, having just thrown the other one. He stared down the scene, Native slumped against the wall, slowly bleeding out, Itza lying face down on the ground, bleeding from his shoulder, and Stain, poised above Itza, the katana he was about to kill Itza with having been knocked out of his hands. He had thought he'd been prepared to see his teacher again, the man who took him under his wing when he was stumbling on the streets, hands and face stained with blood. He thought he'd grieved properly when Stendhal lost his mind and became Stain, the monster. He was wrong. Monster, his old teacher hissed. Or is it Kitsune now? I don't know, Stendhal, Kitsune fired back, still poised to fight. Or is it Stain now? Stain snarled. Leave, now. I have no business with you. We had a lot of disagreements, but we both agreed that going after children was too far. Behind the mask, he frowned, desperately pushing his emotions down. What happened? It's better to call the hero students who would become false heroes than to let them live and become false heroes anyways. Kitsune snarled, biting his tongue to keep in the words he wanted to say from tumbling out. He knew from experience that arguing with Stain would get him nowhere. He couldn't pin down when his old mentor started believing that All Might was the only true hero, but he did remember the exact argument that finally drove him away, for good. Retreading the same ground was not gonna keep Itza from bleeding out. Good to know you're still crazy, Kitsune said. But I'm gonna do what I should have done a long time ago. He raced forwards, pulling a knife for his offhand and swiping for his throat. Stain parried, and he used the bracer on his other hand to deflect the katana going for his neck. He ducked underneath the katanas, lunging forwards. Stain elbowed him in the shoulders, which he turned into a roll under his legs. He tried to go for Stain's back, but with a quick snap of his wrists, he had parried with his katanas. It was easy to slip into the routine of dodging and parrying, brain working overtime while muscle memory carried the weight. Sparks flew from the force behind both blades when they met. He knelt on the ground, blood covering his face and his hands. Time had blurred since he left the compound, the imprint of fire on the back of his eyelids. He hadn't expected freedom to be so hard. Everyone ignored him. He'd gotten a few people that called the police on him, believing him to be a runaway from a local orphanage, and he'd had to run. Worse still, there'd been the people who tried to hurt him, for no other reason than he looked like an easy target. He barely managed to keep himself from falling into muscle memory, picking flee instead of fight. The few times he lost control, he had blacked out, only waking up to see corpses. The voice in his head got louder, demanding he steal quirks from people. Thankfully, he hadn't taken any while he was blacked out. He knew it was his quirk, knew it was like All for One's, but he couldn't control it. He didn't know how. Only All for One could teach him how to use it, and that was out of the question. It was better that the villain believe he's quirkless and have quirks forced into him than to be twisted into becoming the next All for One. Yes, freedom was hard. But it was infinitely better than being back there again. He heard footsteps behind him, but he couldn't bring himself to get up. He was so tired and so hungry. What the dash? He finally looked up, seeing a man standing in the alleyway. The only features he could make out was a ponytail and a mask. A kid. The man was the last thing he saw as he passed out. Kitsune leapt over a katana that would have slashed his tendons, pushing off of the alley wall to give himself some momentum. Stain parried, and he rolled backwards, narrowly avoiding having his head cut off. He twisted, finally nicking Stain in the arm. It wasn't enough, as the man spun around and Kitsune dodged just in time to avoid being stabbed. When he woke up, he was laying on a ratty couch, a warm blanket draped over him. He sat up, taking note of the fact that there wasn't any blood on him and that the room he was in looked old and kind of decrepit. He looked up when a man entered. It was the same man who he saw earlier, he had the same blood-red aura. The man's hair was down, pushed back by a headband, and he wasn't wearing a mask that covered his face. He was wearing clothing that seemed to be casual, if his months of observing had taught him anything, and was carrying a tray with food on it. "You're awake." The man set the tray down on the table next to him, revealing that it held a bowl of white rice and a steaming cup of some sort of tea. "Here, eat. You're way too skinny." He did as he was told, dutifully shoveling rice into his face while the man watched him. Only once the bowl was empty did he set it down. "What's your name, kid?" the man said gruffly, folding his arms. He didn't seem to be unkind, just blunt. "Monster," he said, the word tumbling off his tongue. "Sometimes, I saw Akatani Mikumo on the paperwork they had, but they only called me Monster." The man's brows furrowed, as if he were upset. He was harder to read than the doctor or Tomu Nii. "That makes this more difficult. I'm not calling you Monster." "Why not?" "I am one." "No, you're not." The man walked over, kneeling on the ground next to the couch. "You're a fucking kid. You're only God. How old are you?" He just shrugged. "You don't know." He shook his head. "Is Akatani Mikumo even your real name?" He shook his head again. "I had a name once," he muttered. "But I don't remember what it is. And it gets worse, I'm getting off track." "Kid, you're not a monster." When he stayed silent, the man sighed. "Do you remember where you came from?" He shrugged. "I set the compound on fire when I escaped. I don't remember how long it's been since then." The man sighed. "Well, you can stay here until I can figure out what to do with you." "What do you want, kid?" "Freedom." "Aside from freedom?" He frowned, looking down at his hands. "I want to help people. Maybe if I help enough people, I won't be a monster anymore." He grit his teeth as he felt the blade whiz past the mask. Kitsune swung upwards, elbowing Stain in the chin, giving him the upper hand for a moment. He needed to stay focused. He couldn't afford to let his guard drop. As soon as Stain gets one cut, it's over. He didn't know why, but he couldn't breathe. He drowned out everything around him, trying to get air into his lungs, but he couldn't. "Count with me." He froze when Stendhal's hands wrapped around his own. "Breathe in for 1, 2, 3, 4. Now breathe out for 1, 2, 3, 4. It took a few minutes, but eventually he was able to force air through his lungs. His mentor's hands never removed themselves. Once he came to, he ripped his hands out of Stendhal's. "Why are you still touching me? Why are you still being nice to me after I stole your quirk?" He choked out, tears in his eyes. "Because you didn't mean to," his mentor said, holding his hands back out. "Because if you took my quirk, you can give it back. But I don't know how. Then we'll figure out how your quirk works. Together." He can't do this for very long. He never won against Stendhal when they sparred. But Stain's fighting style has stayed the same, while Kitsune has improved. He can't rely on the same old tricks that got his ass handed to him. He did not get strong enough to haul 2 fridges just to be defeated by a sensei who hasn't changed in years. He ducked under the katana, using his mother's quirk to pull it out of Stain's hand. He kicked up, his shoe connecting with Stain's knee. As the man buckled, he went in for the kill. His back hit the mat again. He groaned when he felt the chalk knife against the back of his neck, and smacked his arm twice on the ground to show that he conceded. When he rolled over, he grasped onto his mentor's hand, letting him pull him up. Training with Stendhal was nothing like training with Sensei. When he was training with Sensei, he was often just beaten by Sensei or Tomu or Shigaraki. With Stendhal, it was a spar, and they were on semi-even playing fields. And he didn't continue to be hurt after he lost, he was helped up, they figured out what he did wrong, and they tried again until he stopped making that mistake. With Sensei, he was hurt for asking questions or disobeying. With Stendhal, he was encouraged. His mentor encouraged his goal of becoming a hero, stating that they needed more heroes who were like him. They figured out he was far behind where he needed to be for school, so trips to the library to try and catch him up were frequent, and he was learning very quickly. Stendhal often praised him, telling him that his mind was his biggest weapon. Not his quirk, but his brain. At this point, he was going to be ahead of kids his age soon. Well, he would be, if they could figure out his age. Slowly, memories were trickling back to him. He thought he could vaguely remember his parents' face, and his mother's first name. It's not a lot, but it's certainly more than he had before. They were also working on his quirk. Separately from the sparring, Stendhal insisted that he learn how to fight quirkless, and then incorporate his quirk into his fighting style. They were learning how his quirk works. The auras he saw around people were actually him seeing their quirks. He could only take quirks through his fingertips. The person he took quirks from couldn't feel it, nor could they feel it being returned or given. They were working on getting the transfer time down, but it took practice. It still baffled him that his mentor trusted him with his quirk. In turn, he learned all about blood curdle. His advice even helped his mentor. Stendhal had no idea that the time limits were based on blood type until he brought it up. He was broken out of his thoughts by a water bottle being thrown at his face. More out of habit than anything else, he caught it easily, taking a long swig. Focus. Right. Sorry, sensei. As I was saying. Stendhal handed the chalk knife back to him. You need to be faster than your opponent. Any hesitancy in your movements would be the end of you, and you would be dead in an actual fight. Do you remember what I said earlier? He nodded, dutifully reciting what his mentor said. Take any opportunity you can, even if it's a killing blow. You must do whatever you can to survive and protect. Good job. Stendhal ruffled his hair, and despite his exhaustion, he smiled. He let his guard down. He stumbled, the knife inches from Stain's neck as pain erupted from his side. He managed to regain his footing, but it was too late. There was a large gash in his side, and Stain held the bloodied katana in his hands. In one last desperate attempt, he lunged forwards, throwing the knife in his hand. At the same time that he licked the blade, the knife pierced his shoulder. Kitsune felt the familiar weight on his body as he crashed to the ground, his other knife clattering to the ground. His eyes blurred, and he realized that it was because of the tears gathering there. He failed. The realization hurt so much more because this wasn't just a stranger, or a hero he knew distantly. This was Itza, his friend, the one who will wave his arms around wildly when he's making a particular point. The one who has a stick up his ass about the rules, yet chose to befriend him anyways, despite his rampant delinquentness. The one who was concerned about his health and constantly tried to get him to ditch his caffeine addiction, or at least lessen the amount of espresso shots. The one who tried to explain to Eri what new words mean, and usually failing, and who thought of Izuku first even when his brother was in the hospital. Tears fell down his face as he realized that Itza was about to die, and he couldn't do anything. You know why I do this, Mikumo, Stain said, getting up from where he had been kneeling. I call the false heroes so you don't have to walk the same path I do. I am no longer Stendhal. I have a new mission, to cull every fake hero. Sensei. No, if you're no longer Stendhal, then you're no longer Sensei, either. I'm leaving. I can't stand by this madness. If you are willing to abandon me so easily, you really are a monster. At least being a monster is better than what you've become. Izuku couldn't look away. He knew that Stain was walking to Itza's death, but he couldn't tear his eyes away. Behind him, he felt the alley's temperature drop by a couple of degrees. Izuku sent out a prayer that who he thinks has arrived has actually arrived. It seems his prayers were answered when a pillar of ice rushed past him, encasing the lower half of Stain's foot. Stain. Shouto shouted. I will not allow you to take any more lives. La Brava didn't usually feel fear. She was a genius hacker, after all. She and Gentle were undetectable, professional heisters, who laugh in the face of fear because they are always 3 steps ahead. She's felt worry, when her friends are hurt, and when Kitsune insists on doing something stupid, but it was different than fear. Yet she was feeling a lot of fear right now. They had agreed to accompany Kitsune on his patrol in Hosu. He wanted to finally take down and arrest the hero killer, who was apparently his old mentor, and it took forever to find that out. Seriously, Kitsune was even worse than Dabi about opening up, and that was saying a lot. Getting Dabi to talk about himself was like pulling teeth. Himi-chan and Dabi were there for backup, and Gentle was protecting La Brava, who would be overseeing the whole thing and letting the backup know when and where they were needed. What none of them anticipated were the fucking monsters. Yes, she knew they were called Numas, but they were monsters. Reanimated corpses with multiple quirks that were mindless killing machines. Textbook definition right there. And how Kitsune knew that was concerning, but again getting the information about Stain had been a fucking nightmare, and they were in the middle of an actively on fire city, so they would have to drill for that information later. So Dabi and Himi-chan, the assigned backup, were busy helping evacuate people. Which meant that Kitsune was alone with Stain. Now, she trusted Kitsune. Really, she did. But even Kitsune admitted that he might need help with the hero killer. So when Shiryoni alerted her that 10 minutes had passed since he started fighting Stain, she made the executive decision to get back up. Hacking into the hero student's phone was easy. Seriously, what kind of horseshit password was 5555? It was even easier to send a mass text to everyone on the kid's contact list with a location pin. She hoped he was okay. Chapter 32, What is a Hero? Xiaodo remembered what his mentor's instructions were. If he encountered Stain, he was to grab Aiza and run. Under no circumstances was he supposed to engage. And yet here he was. Standing in the alleyway, he spotted 3 people who were down for the count, and Xiaodo cannot carry 3 people while outrunning the hero killer. So his only option was to stand his ground. He has a feeling Edshot was not going to see it that way. Another kid, really? Stain scowled, flicking his wrist and shattering the ice around his foot. I suppose I will just have to call you too. Aiza, you really should send more than just your location when you send an SOS, Xiaodo said, keeping his eyes on Stain. I was almost too late to help. No, don't interfere. This is my fight. 2 brats generously offer to help, and this is the thanks you give them. Stain snarled. All the more reason you should be called. Xiaodo thought he heard Kitsune mutter something on the ground. It sounded like thank you, Bralava. That made sense. If Aiza didn't send the signal, the Vigilante probably did. Before Stain could refocus his attention on Aiza, he sent out another volley of ice, separating him from Aiza and Native. Don't let him get any of your blood, Kitsune said. That's how he paralyzes you. Xiaodo nodded, keeping his eyes on the villain as he shifted into a fighting stance. He wouldn't let anyone die. Not while he was there. Izuku grit his teeth, struggling against the weight of the quirk. He knew that he couldn't do anything, that he just had to wait it out, but his body instinctively fought. There was a timer ticking in his mind. He'll be able to move soon. He made himself ignore the fight, shutting his eyes and counting. He'll die if he thinks like Izuku. Izuku is a bleeding heart who crumbles under actual pressure. When he hits 10, it's Kitsune who opens his eyes. Why are you fighting? Aiza asked from the end of the alleyway. Oh, would you have preferred we left you to die? Kitsune snarked back, his eyes never leaving Xiaodo or Stain. A hero prioritizes the rescue above their own feelings. Stain deserves to see justice for every hero he's hurt and killed. No shit. Kitsune shouted back. But that's not the hero's job. Then what is? Did you listen to anything I said? He saw a flash of steel in the corner of his eye, and Kitsune whipped his head around. Don't take your eyes off him. It was too late. Xiaodo took his eyes off of Stain for a second, and he barely dodged the knife going for his face, cutting his cheek instead. Stain threw his katana at the same time he rushed forward, and only the release of his fire kept him from Xiaodo's blood. Kitsune's fingers twitched. Please, stop. Aiza shouted again. I inherited Ingenium's name, I should stop the hero killer. Xiaodo sent another volley of ice at Stain. Ingenium never had a look of vengeance on his face. Pay the fuck attention. Kitsune shouted. Stain slashed through the volley of ice. It's foolish to block your view when your opponent is faster than you. He rushed forward again, but Kitsune was finally free. When Stain was about to reach Xiaodo, he rushed forwards, kicking one of the katanas out of Stain's hands. He parried the other one with a bracer, using his momentum to kick Stain in the gut with his other leg. Listen to me, Kitsune said, keeping his eye on the villain as he addressed Xiaodo. Get the small Ingenium and native out of here. I'll hold off Stain. Are you sure? Xiaodo asked from behind him. He had never won against Stendhal in a knife spar. Him being Kitsune and Stendhal being Stain wouldn't change that. But knives weren't the only available weapon he had. He could never beat Stain in his own game, so he just had to change the game. Even under the mask, he smiled, pulling out his bow staff from one of his pockets. I'm sure. I won't make the same mistake again. He lunged forwards again, staff firmly in hands, as he parried the two knives thrown at him. Stain swung the katanas towards his neck, so he whipped the staff up. Winning the strength battle, he easily pushed Stain backwards, causing the man to stumble. Heart pounding in his ears, Kitsune decided to start building up momentum. Feeling boost under his skin, he started bouncing on the alley walls, using his staff to parry Stain's blades. When he saw an opportunity, he ducked under Stain's katanas, delivering a roundhouse kick to the gut. The villain was launched from the alley, landing in the street with a crack. Kitsune raced forwards, meeting Stain's blades with his staff. He twisted his wrists, making sure the top of his bracers lined up with Stain's hands. He grinned under the mask as he activated the flamethrowers. Stain dropped the katanas, and Kitsune took the opportunity to kick them away. Granted, the fire wasn't that hot, the mechanism was resting right above his wrists, but it was still hot enough to give him a window of opportunity. He kicked hard, feeling his knee connect in between the villain's legs. He heard the telltale sound of engines behind him, and wisely dodged out of the way. Aiza's kick connected squarely with Stain's jaw. The villain collapsed, out cold. While Aiza started panicking about maybe killing Stain, Kitsune knelt down, pressing his fingers to Stain's neck. Both all for one and one for all crackled under his skin. He could hear second and third yelling at him not to take it, while the snake coiled around his neck and hissed at him to take it. Once the snake started tightening around his neck, he tugged hard. Blood curdle settled in his chest. God, he needs a vape. Kitsune stood up, pretending like he didn't have an internal conflict and addressing Aiza. He's alive, just unconscious. Aiza let out a sigh of relief. Shouto came over with rope, and Kitsune stepped aside to let the hero student restrain him. He took in the scene. Native was leaning heavily against a wall, trying to stem the bleeding from his shoulder. Aiza was doing something similar, standing aside as he pressed his hand against his still bleeding shoulder. Which reminded him that he was still bleeding from his side. Leave the knife in, Kitsune said, as Shouto was about to pull out the knife still stuck in Stain's shoulder. He'll only bleed out faster if you take it out. Shouto, Kitsune, Aiza said, giving them both a bow. Thank you for your help, even if you didn't have to save me. Shouto stepped forwards. Saving people is what heroics is all about. Kitsune half-heartedly shrugged. You don't become a vigilante by staying in your lane and not sticking your nose into other people's business. You'd make a good hero, kid, Native said. He shook his head. That's not an option for me. Shouto frowned. Are you okay? Kitsune laughed, injecting as much false cheer into it as he can manage. Oh, I'm fine, but it's gonna hurt like a bitch later. Adrenaline's a hell of a drug. Before anyone could say anything, he felt the telltale sign of two quirks behind him. He lunged forwards, pushing Shouto to the side as he felt talons wrap around his torso. He felt his world tilt a little to the side as he moved on pure instinct, bringing up a knife and slashing through a wing. The talons that had been pressing into the wound on his side released him, and he was suddenly hurtling to the ground. He pulled up shock absorption, bracing himself for impact. Luna Arc. Okako followed her mentor as she leapt across rooftops, following the flying Numu. Out of nowhere, the monster decided to fly off, so she and Mirako were chasing it down. Her heart leapt into her throat as she saw the Numu dive down. She recognized her classmates standing there, along with an injured pro, the hero killer, and the vigilante who saved them at the USJ. He pushed Todoroki out of the way as the Numu grabbed him. She heard her mentor swear and leap up. She could only watch from the street as Kitsune slashed through the Numu's wing, sending him hurtling to the ground. Mirako bounded from a rooftop, launching herself into the air. Luna Arc. Mirako caught the vigilante at the same time she split the Numu in half with an axe kick. Okako ran up to her mentor when she landed, at the same time Endeavor ran over from the other side of the street. Kitsune was stumbling to his feet when she caught up to them. She could see that he was bleeding from his side. Everyone froze when Stain stood up. There was an aura of pure bloodlust around him, and the fear froze Okako to the core. If I don't fix it, if someone isn't stained with blood, if heroes aren't restored, come. Just try me, you fakes. The only one allowed to kill me is All Might, a true hero. It's a good thing I'm not a hero. One moment, Kitsune was standing next to Mirako. The next, he yanked the knife out of Stain's shoulder, using it to slice the villain's throat. She couldn't tear her eyes away from the blood gushing from his throat, as the villain's body fell limply to the street. There was a moment of silence, as blood dripped from the knife in Kitsune's hand back down onto the ground. Her eyes widened as she saw Endeavor, across from her, bring up his hand, about to release his fire upon the vigilante. Wait. She felt arms around her right before the blast of heat, closing her eyes on instinct. When she opened her eyes, Mirako was holding her in her arms, safely out of the range of fire. Stain's body was mildly charred, and the vigilante was gone. Before she could start freaking out about the fact that the number 2 hero just killed Kitsune, the familiar snarky voice sounded off from a rooftop behind her. "Thanks for the free cauterization, India whore." He cackled, presumably disappearing off into the night. Endeavor was about to follow him, when Native stood up. "Wait. We need to prioritize the kids." She looked around. Todoroki was bleeding from his cheek, Aitsu was pressing a hand against his shoulder, and Native was doing something similar. Endeavor huffed, but stomped away as the ambulances started arriving. Mirako put Okako back on her feet as one of Ingenium's sidekicks came up to them. A blanket was draped around Okako's shoulders, and she clutched it to her as Mirako went to make a call. She was sure that Kitsune was a kid like them. Dabi groaned, cracking his back. He is going to be sore for days, weeks, maybe even months after this. He groaned again when he heard the distinctive flapping of wings. "No, I'm not homeless, and I don't need to go to a hospital," Dabi said, turning around to see Hawks touching down amid the rubble. There were so many heroes who kept asking if he was homeless or if he needed to go to the hospital. He remembered why he brokered online. "I know who you are, Dabi," the hero said, red wings folding up as he brushed off his jacket. "I heard about what you're doing. Surprisingly kind of you to help. I might have thought you had an emotion in your shriveled dead heart." He rolled his eyes, continuing to try and stretch out his muscles. Surprisingly cutthroat of the number 12 hero to order a bottle of poison. The man-child squawked. "I would never. That would be extremely unheroic, and the number 12 hero doesn't need poison, thank you very much." "You set your username as not a chicken," Dabi deadpanned. "It's very obvious." Before the hero could respond, the comm crackled in his pocket, and Dabi hurriedly pulled it out and put it back in his ear. "Dabi. Are you there?" He turned his back on the hero, responding quickly. "I'm here. Foxy needs help." His blood turned cold. Kitsune did say he might need backup, but he didn't expect to actually be called upon. He was pretty sure that Himi-chan would be first in priority for backup. "Send me a location, I'm on my way." Location sent. "Be prepared for anything." Dabi swore, extensively, as he pulled out his phone. The location popped up as an alleyway, perfect for a Stain ambush. Hawks walked over, and Dabi did not shriek when the hero put his hand on Dabi's shoulder. "Seems you need some help. How did you dash?" "Advanced hearing," Hawks said, tapping his ears. "I'll fly you there, it'd probably be faster than running." As much as he hated accepting help from a hero, he did see the Twitter post about Kitsune and Hawks flying together, so it shouldn't be too bad. "Fine. But don't fucking drop me." Hawks grinned, grabbing Dabi under the arms, and lifting up into the sky. "Wouldn't dream of it." He was sitting on the couch, reading a book he didn't remember the title of when he heard the apartment door open again. Stendhal walked back in, a bag slung over his shoulder. Knowing he wasn't going to get any more reading done today, he put a receipt in as a bookmark and watched curiously as his mentor walked over to the couch. "Do you remember the conversation we had a few weeks ago?" He nodded, wondering what that had to do with anything. "Well, I couldn't find any legal papers about you or your parents," Stendhal said. "It's like none of you existed. But I was able to figure out where you used to live, and I found this." He pulled something out of the bag, putting it in his hands. It was a book, with memories written out on the cover. He gasped as he opened it up. He was greeted with a picture of what looked like a baby picture of him, in the arms of the woman he identified as his mother. There was also a picture of his baby chart. He flipped through the scrapbook. It was filled with pictures of his childhood, his parents, and another family that must have been friends. He went through the people, placing names to faces. Bakugo Masaru. Bakugo Mitsuki. Bakugo Katsuki. Midoriya Hisashi. Midoriya Inko. Midoriya Izuku, he said, slowly enunciating the letters. Midoriya Izuku. Midoriya Izuku. Do you recognize anyone? Stendhal asked. He shook his head, running his fingers over the pages. I don't know any of them. But I'd like to. Alright, that's where we'll leave off for the day. Thanks so much for listening along with me today. If you enjoyed, please like and comment down below. It really helps with the algorithms. I look forward to seeing you next time. Ciao for now, lovelies.